Imagine being told your child will never speak, never live an independent life. Now, imagine defying that prognosis through groundbreaking AI research in a deeply personal scientific quest. Today, we're diving into that extraordinary journey with Dr. Alma Barranco-Mendoza, an AI pioneer who's not only reshaping digital transformation, also revolutionizing brain health. What she's uncovered about the power of natural fatty acids change everything you think you know about conditions like Alzheimer's, ADHD, and autism. Stay tuned because this conversation isn't just about technology, it's about hope, about resilience, and the incredible human spirit. Welcome to the WATSNEX Podcast, the show that explores the intersection of innovation, market strategy, and operational excellence in high-stakes industries like life sciences. Sharing insights from visionary biopharma and medtech executives who are navigating inflection points like seeking funding, expanding outreach, or managing lean growth. I'm your host, Pascal Côté, founder and CEO of WATSNEX Biopharma. With over 25 years of hands-on project management and leadership across the entire life science value chain, from R&D and regulatory to tech transfer, manufacturing, and commercialization at companies like Pfizer, Merck, Novartis, and Medidata, I have witnessed firsthand the profound impact of technology and cutting-edge AI-driven commercial acceleration strategies. Today, we have a guest who embodies that intersection of science. Joining us is Dr. Alma Barranco-Mendoza, an AI innovator, CEO, CTO of Infogenetica Solutions, and a recognized expert in business process optimization and digital transformation. Dr. Barranco-Mendoza, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
It really is a pleasure for me as well, Pascal.
Before we dive in a quick word from our sponsor, today's topic is Dr. Barranco-Mendoza's AI pioneer status and accelerating drug development with AI. Your career is truly remarkable. You're not just an AI expert, you're a true pioneer, having started in AI almost 35 years ago, developing diagnostic systems for lung cancer and creating one of the first AI-driven selling tools in the mid-90s. This places you at the very forefront of AI's application in life sciences. Dr. Steve Fox, a notable figure in our industry, has often highlighted the critical need for accelerating the development and commercialization of new drugs. From your unique vantage point as an AI pioneer in life sciences, how do you see AI making this acceleration possible across the entire drug life cycle?
AI has been around for a very long time, but in terms of the life sciences, a lot of people have not considered artificial intelligence applications. I did my PhD in AI applied to medicine. And I started utilizing artificial intelligence for lung cancer diagnosis. That was my PhD thesis, what I started focusing on. But from that point forward, I've been doing a lot of applications of AI within the health industry and other industries as well. As you mentioned, we were one of the very first companies that brought artificial intelligence to the web, utilizing AI almost a decade before Amazon. We developed the concept of upselling to be able to analyze the purchases of similar customers and suggest selling options that would predict the growth of companies and so on. So it was very early, and like the research that I did on lung cancer really was quite revolutionary at the time, like cancer lesions, which abnormalities in the lung cells that could become cancerous. But at that point in time, even the expert pathologists were only getting it right about 50% of the time, which is as good as tossing a coin. So the AI solution that we developed with my PhD research, we were able to bring it up to a 70% correctness in prediction, which is quite significant change. So there are problems that are easier for artificial intelligence solutions to be able to solve. But the situation with medicine, nobody was looking at AI from the utilizing natural language. So that was one of the innovations that I incorporated when I started working on AI in medicine, so that we could incorporate information from different sources, like radiographies and patient records and patient history and genomics and things like that. This application that was very, very pioneering. So, some of the solutions that we developed and the algorithms that we developed were in the very early stages. And it was really the hardware, the thing that was holding us back, because the processing time was very slow. So as technology has evolved, now the speed of processing is such that it allows us to do analysis that back then it would take us hours and occasionally even days, now in a matter of seconds. So that is the real innovation. Now, with the further use of the web, the internet as we know it, that it has graphic interface and so on, started in 94. So, to have a company in 96, we are talking super early adoption, right? So now large language models, or LLMs, which are now they're called, are what are driving all this innovation. And now everyday person can talk to these artificial intelligence solutions, right? So that is a major step forward. But when my twins were born, is what forced me to look into it on a more applicable basis, because one of them had a very severe diagnosis. They was identified as autistic and ADHD, but autism level 3, which is the most severe level of autism in terms of needs. The prognosis was that he would never speak, he would be in diapers all his life, never have any meaningful social interactions. He also had craniosynostosis, so his brain was being pressured. He had problems with coordination, couldn't even feed himself, let alone be able to write or do things. So it was a very, very dim prognosis of what his future would be like. So that pushed us into trying to find a solution to this condition. And my husband, who is also a medical research scientist, who has focused most of his career on the impact of fatty acids, specifically in the brain. He used to work in a pharmaceutical developing Alzheimer's medications, and he at the time was working in BC Cancer Agency, also looking at cancer and the impact on the brain. When he started noticing these very severe symptoms, he started identifying that they were kind of similar to those of very advanced Alzheimer's, because actually couldn't sleep, he couldn't focus, he had disorientation, he had unexplained fears, a lot of anxiety, unable to control his emotions, movements that were involuntary and repetitive, dexterity issues and things like that. So he thought at the time, well, we need to give him some fatty acids, right? Like he thought, well, let's find the full spectrum of fatty acids. And we started looking in the market, and it turns out that the best thing you can get in terms of fatty acids is just omega-369, which is like a very small fraction of all the fatty acids that your brain needs. So that's why I say, well, let's create our own. And typically development of medication is a process of years, even decades sometimes, to be able to put together the ingredients and so on. He already knew the type of molecule that we wanted to incorporate into his diet, but we thought, okay, let's put it together. And that's where the model of artificial intelligence that I had created for drug development came into play. So I created certain constraints in terms of allergy, because also my child was tremendously allergic to so many different types of food, gluten and sugars and soy and, different types of nuts. Like there were so many constraints that I had. I fed it all the different sources of fatty acids in the mix and doing the analysis. And we came up with this formulation that would help our son so that sped up the process, which traditionally, to be able to generate medication, it would take decades while you did the model with crystals and so on. So we were able to computationally do this model and taste all the possibilities of different types of combinations so that we got the stable structure that we wanted. And we were able to do this formulation only using natural ingredients. I was the first one to start testing this, and it was wonderful for me. Like, I would tell people that I had twins and a lobotomy because I went from like perfect memory to if I don't write it, I don't remember. It was terrible. It really affected me emotionally and like depression. And I had difficulty sleeping and a lot of anxiety. When I started taking this, I started feeling really well and started noticing that my memory came back as it was before pregnancy, and I was a lot calmer and was able to sleep better. So I thought, okay, let's give it to the boys, because like we knew it was safe, right? Because I had used like all full ingredients. And is to make a long story short, my child, who at the time he was 7 years old, no language, in diapers, not having any meaningful interaction with people. He was kind of in his own world. He is now 23 years old. Last summer, he graduated from college. He speaks. He lives independently. He is able to, care for himself fully. Like, it was quite a dramatic change. It took years, and he is autistic, but he is a functional autistic person who is able to utilize his very capable brain, and he's very able to process information in ways that you would not believe. And the problem with fatty acids when they're lacking, is that so many functions are out of whack because they're precursors of a lot of neurotransmitters, which like serotonin, GABA, melatonin, norepinephrine, and so things that control your mood, control your emotions, control your sleep, control your happiness, or your ability to focus, and so on. So by being able to incorporate all these elements that were missing in his body, his body itself started healing, right? And started being able to follow the development as he should have had. My diet before pregnancy had been better, because again, I also had a deficit, right, which I inherited to my children. Like my other boy was also diagnosed with ADHD, although he had not suffered as much as his brother, but also helped him, overcome his ADHD and being able, I in fact graduated with honors and got a full ride scholarship to UBC to do his university degree. So it is possible to change all these conditions that we had been told. But, like thanks to our research, and that's what I was telling you, is like our children are like the absolute best motivators for research progress. My son was in the cohort of autistic children who were at level 3, so not progressing. So he was in that group from 4 years old to 7, not progressing with everybody else. And when at 7 years old, we started giving the supplement, they started noticing how it got better and better and better and better and better and improving. And they were the ones who told us, like, what are you doing and where can we get it? And they encouraged us to actually commercialize this. So we added this as a new arm of, like biotech consulting and, natural health products manufacturing. So we have used AI for our inventory control, for our production, because we use robotics and a lot of our inventory tracking and our marketing as well. We like quite a bit on the marketing side. A lot of our assets are generated with AI, a lot of our messaging, because I'm a scientist, I'm not a marketer. So, it's a special language that you need to use for marketing. So it helps me that way. And, like in terms of, for example, a lot of our SOPs, like pharma is a very, very regulated industry. So you have to create standards of standard processes and guidelines and that are very, very specific operating procedures. So AI helped me build mine, right? Like, and I wasn't an expert, but I was able to do that with artificial intelligence, many things.
So you're doing all of that with just 2 people in your company and using AI for everything?
We are three people now. We have somebody in Ontario that is helping us with sales.
Would you say that that from target identification and lead optimization to clinical trial design and regulatory submissions, are these ripe for significant acceleration through AI right now? And if you could be specific as well on the regulatory side, how AI can be effectively utilized for CMC, chemistry, manufacturing and controls, filing, or of notoriously complex and time-consuming process? And what are the immediate gains and long-term benefits that you foresee?
Everything that you mentioned could utilize in some way or another artificial intelligence. And let's clarify, artificial intelligence is interesting because the immediate thing people think is nowadays like the latest, large language models or generative AI. But artificial intelligence actually is like saying cancer, right? Like there are different types and different levels, right? So artificial intelligence is an umbrella for many, 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 many areas of research. So yes, we have generative AI that can help with the marketing and so on. The important thing to remember, though, is that you want to make sure that utilize models that are specialized in your domain, or you start custom feeding information to them. Let's remember, like the web is a web, right? Like you have good content and bad content. So if you're just using your, the free version of, I don't know, ChatGPT or, Claude or Gemini or whatever model you choose to use, they all are fairly good, right? Like they have, all of them have a significant power. But if you do not narrow down the data, like the original ChatGPT started with Yelp, how good is the data from Yelp, right? When you're talking to medical, right, you have to feed it, prompt it early on and incorporate a data set that is true and valid. Very good, like AI is very good at lying. Like the new large language models, they were designed to fill in information. So if your sources are not very good, you're not going to get very good results. Now, privacy issues are also very important. Now, other areas of AI, obviously robotics are very important. So for manufacturing processes, that is an area that we have advanced a lot, in the manufacturing industry, they have been much more early adopters than in health. So, and they worked a lot, like since car manufacturing and so on. Now you don't have a lot of people on the floor doing things, like a lot of the electronics. You have robots, like automatically creating like dashboards and things like that. So that is a big part. Another area of AI is computer vision, to be able to identify barcode readers. It used to be a very, very manual labor, right? Like to be able to scan quickly. Now you have different scanners that you can just set in your storage and identify different points to, to estimate how many boxes you have, how many, In terms of our case, where we are natural products, we don't like to create very large batches, because it's all natural. It doesn't have artificial preservatives and so like it. We want it to be as fresh as possible. We want to just order at the moment that, we need it for production and it's generated. And when we're running low, then we do a new batch that is all fresh and it's all ready to ship, right? So it has to be very timely, right? So I have to have a lot of control of my inventories, and I mean sell online primarily. So it's automated, right? Like the moment that I have to calculate the number of orders that are coming in, so that at a certain point, I get a trigger set that notifies me, well, you need to make an order. It generates a purchase order automatically, we just get a notification for approval. I just look at my list of things for approval and go for it. Gets fired to our suppliers, right? So that once the order comes in, is ready, like we don't have it sitting. Also, we don't have a very large storage. I don't want ingredients sitting forever, for receivership, right? These are automated processes that you can utilize technology with, right? And different areas of artificial intelligence. So it is a lot, there are many things that need to be taken, that we need to track, but AI helps me a whole lot, to do that.
Specific to our industry, you mentioned about the necessity to have like very specific prompts and not necessarily use the generally available LLMs. Find those prompts or those industry specific tools. Do you have to create all of them from your own experience? Or there are some more generally available specialized tools? And I have in mind, like, for example, for a listener who would want to develop like a CMC file or a CMC approach to automate as much as possible for the data gathering and things like that.
Like I build my own, right? Like for myself, I know there are a few companies coming out. Like right now, I have not seen anybody like very specific solutions as of yet. Most of them are custom. I have done a number of implementations myself, that have utilized some of these models that I mentioned, that to help them develop their own data set, like to help them identify the prompting that they need to be able to narrow down, prevent their large language model not to hallucinate, that utilizes their documents, their thing. So we're early in the industry right now, I've been working on, a couple of projects where, hopefully soon we will be able to release. As of right now, I don't think there's any like a specific solution in the market. I know of a few companies, a few startups that are working on possible solutions specific for the pharmaceutical industry. As of yet, I have not seen anything like concrete. I would say, oh yeah, this is the go-to place.
I get that.
But I mean, like generic solutions with a good prompt architect and, somebody who understands and helps them make sense of their data, like data governance is critical when it comes to artificial intelligence, and the health industry, again, very behind, like clinical guidelines, for example, retail already had tools since the very, very first, system I developed was for a legal management system. It was in 1987. I mean, you're talking many years back, So we are very, very behind in our industry in terms of use of technology. And I mean, it's understandable. Humans are complex. Health is very complex. It's a very, very highly regulated industry for a reason, right? Like we don't want to mess up with our own health. However, there's a lot of fear of technology in the industries. I'm glad to see now it's beginning to be accepted, and I'm getting a number of calls from pharma peers who I have met in conferences and the sort that now are beginning to get quite interested. But, when I finished my PhD and I was trying to sell solutions, nobody cared, right? Like, oh, no. I remember giving the talk at Faculty of Medicine of UBC, telling them how one day their doctor would be coming with a tool, like a mobile tool next to the bed of the patient where all the radiographies and their family history would be present and it would help them. And there were doctors that stood like, that is just fantasy. That's the TV. That's never going to happen. They told me that. Like, I wish I had a recording, because what did your mobile device look in 96, right? Like, we had those bricks, Nokia flip 4, like not even. So they couldn't visualize a tablet they couldn't visualize a mobile phone where, right now the data that we have in our cell phones is way more powerful than rooms of computers back in the 90s, right? Like technology, hardware is being extraordinary. Those things that I was telling them back then, now it's adopted. So when I was trying to sell it like in the 90s, nobody wanted that.
I'd like to go back to the development of NeuroActiv Oil. You've gone through a lot, I think, from the initial diagnosis and your insights from your husband's research into fatty acid and to the scientific development and ultimately the decision to commercialize it. The haha moment or key scientific insight that led you and your husband to focus on a full spectrum fatty acid formulation, especially when existing supplements were so limited to just omega-3, 6, and 9. Could you describe how you came up with the concentrate on fatty acids?
Yeah, like it's because of my husband's research prior to that in Alzheimer's research, like he had been interested in fatty acid quite early on, even since he was, an undergraduate student. His undergraduate thesis was the use of an oil from a plant called Taxus baccata, how its impact on cancer development, because essentially fatty acids are present in all the cells of your body. Like they're very important elements. They call part of the essential components of our body: proteins, sugars, and fatty acids, so the cell membrane is made up of fatty acids, which its function is absorb nutrients, release toxins, interact with the other cells, like protect the cell, is the one that sends the messaging from one cell to another. So our brain, for example, which is made of 60% of fatty acids, those connections in our neurons are made up of fatty acids, which is called myelin. So when the myelin is intact, that connectivity is very, very effective, right? So the information goes from here to here. So it's immediate. But when we have a deficit of fatty acids, that cell membrane, from being very solid, compact, is a very hydrophobic. So it maintains the liquid inside the cell, very well protected. When you're missing fatty acids, it starts becoming porous. So you lose a lot of the, cells start losing that nice bouncy effect, so it becomes weaker. And as we age, we're losing fatty acids. That is because our body cannot develop it. We need to ingest it. Nutritional opportunities, especially in societies like North America, which everything is processed, it became low fat. Everything is low fat, right? That's a healthy diet. But then we started really compromising our health and not eating the important fatty acids that are part, that they were part of our yogurt, they were part of our meats, they were part of the way we prepare food. So by not taking that, we are creating these gaps, and that cell membrane starts becoming porous. The connections start being weakened to the point of, it's like a wiring, you start peeling the wire, you have short circuits to the point that eventually breaks. So a connectivity on your brain that could have gone from here to here very fast, it requires a heck of a lot more work because it has to go from here to here to here and eventually maybe reaching here. So it took longer, or not getting there at all. Right? So you lose information. So memory and things like that start not working. Processes like sleep start not functioning. And as I mentioned, it's also the precursor of many of the neurotransmitters. That's why it was really, really important with all this signaling and so on, because it really was part of these metabolic processes that were not being completed, right? And it's present in most neurodivergent people. One of the hypotheses that we have is that, autism, ADHD, and giftedness, they all are essentially part of the same spectrum, just in different presentations in terms of the areas that are being challenged, because these are hyperactive brains. If you look at the studies of the brain, how, you put those receptors and you can visualize how active your brain. Neurotypical brains, they have areas of impulse, and there are moments that they're shining, but when they're deeply concentrated on something important. But neurodivergent brains, like autistic or a gifted person, are never quiet. Like they're always firing. So you see all these lights appearing in the monitor, on the different areas of the brain happening. There's no filter. So they're receiving all the impulses equally. It's the brain utilizes a lot more energy than neurotypical brains. And the sources of energy for our brain are only two, either sugars or fatty acids. And the challenge with sugars is that you take sugar and it's a very fast uptake, but it also drops down very rapidly. When you get this high on sugar and then the crash, right? So you get this anxiety like, I need more sugar. So where do you get the sugar? Either pure sugars or carbohydrates that convert into sugars. So you see a lot of these people who are neurodivergent are addicted to carbohydrates, like pastas, fries, bread, like they are constantly eating because they need their brain to be fed. And the challenge is that when you go down, your body produces insulin with the intention to expand that energetic curve, right? But if you immediately eat, so it pushes it even further up, which pushes it even further down. And you go like that if you keep eating and eating to the point that you break down, that you become insulin resistant, which is really what diabetes is all about. So we tends to develop diabetes. However, when your brain utilizes carbohydrates, the energetic curve is not as high, but it's much wider. So you have energy that is consistent for much longer periods of time. So you don't get this like that super high, but you also don't get super low because the energetic curves are equivalent, right? So when you get high, you get low, right? So if you get this much high, you get this much low. But if you get this much high, you get this much low. So with fatty acids, you can sustain that energy better. So you are not as anxiously hungry, and your brain can maintain the level of activity without feeling that stress of, like the anxiety that I need more energy, right? So it functions better and reduces anxiety, and, it's able to generate a lot of things. Another important factor of fatty acids is that also the transporters of information. So elements like the thyroid that sends a signal into the brain or other organs, it wraps up in fatty acids and it goes into the bloodstream to send that information. When you don't have all the fatty acids, it's difficult, that information to get to the places where it needs to. You have the thyroid, you have the liver, you have the brain sending information to all the other organs and your heart. And so it makes it challenging. Also, when we were talking about full spectrum, like when you're missing elements of the complete spectrum is a liquid, right? Like it's a very fluid liquid. But if you take away elements of this structure of full spectrum of fatty acids, becomes a more unstable molecule, which ends up being oxidated. So when you have oxidated fatty acids, they become sticky. So for example, imagine your cooking oil. When you leave it open for a long time, you start getting very sticky feeling on your bottle, which is exactly what happens in your circulatory system. So you have the full spectrum of fatty acid. It's kind of like your white and red cells in your cardiovascular system are floating in a river of fatty acids. Like this is super simplification, but so in this river of fatty acids, that if it's complete, it just flows. So your heart is pumping. It's like a balloon, right? You fill it up with water. Water comes, you don't need to put too much effort for things to flow nicely. However, if you have oxidated fatty acids, they start sticking onto the walls of the veins and arteries. So first of all, you're blocking the flow, and you can get thrombos, which are like clots of blood, essentially, because it's sticky. If you have blockages in your veins and arteries, you can create a myocardial infarction or thrombosis in parts of your body, or stroke in your brain, or things like that, because you are blocking all these things because your fatty acids in your blood are oxidated, right? And also your heart has to work so much harder because if, as I was saying, the analogy with the balloon, If you, instead of filling it with water, you want to fill it with something sticky like molasses, I mean, you have to squish that thing in order to be able to flow. So that is an equivalent how your heart has to work so much harder with when you have all these oxidated fatty acids in your body. So that's what it was very important for us. The research that my husband did, and like sometimes you say like, I'm a Christian. I believe in God, and I think that sometimes God establishes a path in your life that you don't see. So my husband, after studying fatty acids, cancer for his undergraduate, he did a master in food science, and his research was on fatty acids applied to food, specifically, and how you could utilize your fatty acids to do mayonnaises and things like that outside of refrigeration. So using fatty acids to work outside refrigeration. And then he did his PhD, and he was using fatty acids as for crop, like a plague control in crops. So he studied the fatty acids of the human cell so that he would use like a natural pesticide made of fatty acids that the body didn't absorb. So that's how we knew which fatty acids were part of the human cell, because he had researched that for his PhD, which also made no sense, going from mayonnaises to like control, like plague control. And then he went like into the pharma, working on Alzheimer's medication. And then he went into BC cancer to work on cancer research, and but all of these pieces were what we needed to put together our product, right? Because we needed the fatty acids that would keep our product fresh outside refrigeration. We're the only supplements that have omegas that can live outside of refrigeration for up to 2 years, maintaining the freshness. That, like, otherwise, you have to put it in refrigeration. And I mean, if you take, for example, fish oil would spoil within 2 weeks if you keep it outside refrigeration. But by putting the entire spectrum together in this molecule that we had identified, we maintain that stability naturally. They're very, very important. And that's why we decided to go the direction we went.
It really sounds like you're a power couple, and you're so collaborative and helping each other and really getting all your intuition and brain and knowledge all together to create this amazing solution. And I would like to know about NeuroActiv Oil in relation to healthy aging. Could you share specific stories and testimonials that stand out to you, and potentially the story about your mother?
Yeah, like my grandmother in particular. At that time, my grandmother, when we finally came up with the formulation and started giving it to the boys, my grandmother had already been diagnosed for 10 years with Alzheimer's. And she was already, like in her late 80s, like actually early 90s at this point in time. She was diagnosed in her 80s. And when we had the product, she was already not speaking to anybody. She couldn't remember people. She had severe problems with cardiovascular. She had like the memory, obviously, she couldn't remember. She hadn't spoken about my grandfather in almost 5 years, and she couldn't recognize any of the family members. She was pretty much only in bed most of the time by this point in time, because she had very little energy, and she had some problems with dexterity, and, she would get angry and frustrated with things and disoriented and so on. So we started giving it to her as well, right? Like once we saw that it was helping us, we thought, oh, maybe I can help my grandma, right? Like with all these diagnoses, she was taking medication for cholesterol. She was taking medication to sleep because she couldn't sleep. She was taking medication for anxiety. She was taking medication for high blood pressure. She had about 10 different pieces of medication that she was taking at this point in time. We started giving it to her, and in a matter of months, she started sleeping better, calm down. We removed the sleeping medication. Her blood pressure regulated, so we removed the blood pressure medication. We, like the anticoagulant that she was taking, her blood started coagulating. We removed almost all I think she was left with 2 or 3 medication stops from the more than 10 that she had, she was taking. She started talking about my grandpa again. she started recognizing people. She started being able to sleep. She was much more calmer, and it was such an incredible thing, but, sadly, as I said, she was very old. She was in her late 90s, and she passed away about 2 or 3 years after she started taking this because of her age, right? But she died in a much better state than, when we started. She had a better quality of life afterwards. But it broke my heart thinking I wish I had this, because she didn't have to go through this and this very severe situation. And we have had nowadays, I'm grateful because we are able to help people, who are showing early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's have better prognosis, right? To do much better with their health. Recently, a very dear friend of mine from university, her mom got diagnosed, and she was very anti-supplement, right? So for 3 years, she suffered with this, and her memory was in severe decline. And my friend was insisting until they told her, yeah, you got Alzheimer's. She got diagnosed, and she was not doing well. She accepted and started taking the supplement. And then in her 1-year test, they said there was no decline. But my friend said it sounded like they wanted to say it was better, but they didn't want to, right? And her 2-year check, they said, oh my God, she's doing better than the first time we checked her out. So at her year 3, they told her, if next year you show improvement, we're going to remove you from our clients because we don't have to follow up on this because you are doing really great in terms of your memory. So being able to help somebody like the mother of my very, very dear friend, that's priceless for me. And, us as a family with a history of Alzheimer's, we all take it. I take my mom, my aunts, everybody, and so far we all are doing fairly well, thank God. Because it's a terrible disease, I think it's one of the cruelest diseases because you lose them before you lose them, right? So you're mourning all along while they are still alive. And so it's, it's a blessing to be able to help them. So in terms of anti-aging, that's one of the things that we started noticing, that most of my clients, we developed this formulation for neurodivergent people, but it really about 80% of my clients are older adults, because we're the ones, we're able to see how we're doing. When you feel your memory is doing better, you're sleeping better, you have more energy, your skin is looking so much better. Now we also develop skincare products. It's because it's your cells as they age is why we're losing other fatty acids, right? And things like your joints and your bones and your memory. And you think it's okay, all of this that is being affected are fatty acids, right? And our heart, our cardiovascular system, and all of these things have to do with deficit of fatty acids, right? And sadly, our diet is not really very good in terms of, naturally being able to consume. And our food production, we utilize organic cold press oils for our ingredients exclusively. So hard to be able to get those. So hard. Our suppliers, there are not that many because nowadays, everybody's they want to accelerate. So, for example, coconut oil, is so much faster when they heat it and then they just extract it. But when you heat, especially things like olive oil, people tell me, oh, I'm so healthy, I cook with olive oil. If you heat olive oil, you take away all the nutritional benefits of olive oil. So it's they're wasting money. Really good olive oil is very expensive. So if you're buying a cheap olive oil, it's because it got extracted in heat. So all the omega components that were really important for your health are gone because they break down with a little heat. So using it for cooking, also, if you burn it, that's carcinogenic, so you're trying to be super healthy, but olive oil burns so fast that you are actually doing a harm when you're trying to be healthy, right? So better to cook and use coconut oil is really good for cooking. That's lard is good for cooking, because they maintain they're good for the stability of the molecule. There's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to fatty acids, and people are afraid, I'm getting fat, I don't want to take, fats because I get fat. That is wrong, right? Like, first of all, fats are not fatty acids. Fatty acids are the components. It's like saying hydrogen and oxygen are different from water, right? Water is made of hydrogen. But like same thing, fatty acids are components of fat, so they're very different things. But by being able to identify these important fatty acids for your body, like they're fundamental, right? You don't get fat. In fact, your thyroid, for example, requires fatty acids for it to function effectively. Like what I was explaining about diabetes, the energy intake. If you take fatty acids, you are not going to be hungry all the time. People who do not take fatty acids are hungry all the time because that signaling from your stomach to your brain that says, I'm satisfied, requires to be wrapped in fatty acids for it to get to the brain. So if you're not eating fat, that message is never getting there. So you're always hungry. So you eat way more than if you, if you were able to do that, to have fat as part of your,
Thank you for sharing all this passion, and also for helping our elderly community to have a better quality of life, and also giving us the tools and the hope to transition away from being subscribe or have to take medication all our life, and have the tool to have a healthy and living and having some vitality. I'd like to switch gear and change subject slightly. During our previous conversation, you mentioned about a crucial point that is on top of many Canadian life science companies, the significant regulatory and challenges for AI adoption, especially concerning patient data and cross-border issues. Specifically, you mentioned that Canadian companies face difficulties implementing AI solutions that use data across borders due to strict privacy regulations, while U.S. clients have an easier time because many large language models reside in the U.S. Can you elaborate on these governance laws in Canada and the cross-border regulation that pose such a challenge for AI integration into Canadian life science companies?
Yeah, this is a really important point, because what happens is part of the privacy regulations in Canada is PIPA and PIPEDA, for example, that those are two of the privacy regulatory. That there is also the Health Act and so on in Canada for privacy, requires that any private information, if you are a public sector and so on, cannot cross the Canadian border. So, and we're talking not just live data, but backups and, so it's very important that you have a very strict governance model within your data stores in life sciences in particular, because especially if you're dealing with patients, right, and patient care. Because if you cross that, you are liable to be sued by the government, right? Like, or by the patients themselves, because you are breaking both federal and provincial privacy regulation. Like, I'm located in British Columbia, in Vancouver, which has one of the strictest privacy regulatory laws in Canada. So it is very tricky to be able to handle patient data and client data and so on within, like, cloud systems, right? Because many of the cloud providers, I mean, and you're talking Google, you're talking Amazon, you're talking Microsoft and so on, they have their big servers in the United States or elsewhere, not even in the US, and in Asia and in Africa and so on. So that breaks these privacy regulations, right? Like if you're sending information out there. So data governance essentially is defining how and where your data gets stored, how, like in terms of who has access to the data, in which location the data gets accessed, how the data gets broken down into itself to be able to manage situations. So there are ways to go about as a Canadian company to be able to utilize some of these models. As I mentioned, I use very much my systems using artificial intelligence. But I am super careful on how my data gets stored. So for example, any patient or client data has its own database, and that is managed all internally. I have servers, like my website is hosted in Canada. I make sure that my provider had their backup in Canada, and none of the processes, they didn't utilize cloud services that were going elsewhere where data was being transported. So, because otherwise I will be breaking privacy regulations, right? So I divide my data, as I said, like patient data, a particular storage location. Now I clean up some of my data, for example, for research. So I can utilize AI, for example, for my inventory system, because that's not private, right? Like, you run the risk if you have anything in Amazon, or like anybody else, or or you utilize any, like, I don't know, ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. Your risk, it goes to the US. What do you do? Well, any front-facing patient information, like, it gets stripped of any identifying elements. And I mean by identifying elements, their name, where they work and their roles, their address, their phone number, their email. All that information is private. You cannot cross border. But for example, if you have generic information, a person between 50 and 60 years old, that you can cross borders, right? Because you are not talking about a specific person. So you have to design your data very, very well. And you have to have the governance for it as well, because who has access to that data is also very important, right? Like how you design your systems that only certain people have access to certain data, how, like, the policies that you implement in your company. You cannot put in flash drives patient information, for example. That's really, really fundamental, right? Like if your laptop has patient information, then the laptop stays in the office, right? And you have to keep it every day under key and lock and key. Like that is privacy, like those are details that, is very important. Like I used to be the CIO of Trinity Western University, and also of the Canadian Space Society. Like professors thought it was really easy to carry a flash drive with the grades of the student. That falls on the privacy of information. And then the car got broken. Somebody broke into their car and they stole their laptop. That is an incident that we had to report. And many companies who are in pharma and so on, they don't think about these things, right? And especially smaller companies that they don't have a dedicated CIO and so on, that they're just kind of like, oh, let's grab this and let's grab this. And, I have the cloud solutions and, I have my Google and I have my Google Drive and everybody accesses it. If Google gets asked by the government to see the data, they will disclose the data by regulation, right? So, which we also have in Canada, by the way, but it's a lot harder. That also exists, for the national security or whatever, not that they require data to be disclosed. So it's very important that even at the start, when you're designing your ERPs and content management systems and customer management systems and things like that, that you start with privacy in mind before any database design, and make sure that if you're purchasing systems, like, you analyze how they're doing it, because let me tell you, many of these developers that have products out there, especially if they're open source, are like, some are great, some are not. Sometimes it's like the kid who is just programming, in between their homework or whatever, and they develop this system and they put it on the web and, the Apple Store, and people are using it. They don't. This kid is not thinking privacy, right? Like, it's just not.
I would like to thank you for all this amazing conversation, Doctor. This has been incredibly insightful and inspiring conversation. To recap some of the profound points that we've covered today, we explored your journey in AI from its nascent stages and its critical role in accelerating drug development and commercialization, including specific application like CMC filing. We delve into the deeply personal and scientifically rigorous development of NeuroActiv Oil, underscoring the critical role of full-spectrum fatty acids in brain health, neurodevelopment, and healthy aging. And we discuss the crucial challenges and strategic approaches to navigating AI adoption, data governance, and regulatory compliance within the Canadian life sciences sector, particularly the complexities of cross-border data regulations. For me, the most powerful takeaway is the blend of scientific innovation driven by personal purpose. It truly underscores how profound solutions often emerge from a deep personal investment and a rigorous application of expertise. Your work is a testament to that. Alma, for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, Infogenetica Solutions, NeuroActiv Oil, consulting services, where's the best place for them to connect with you and explore these incredible solutions?
The best way for them to connect with us is through our website. That's infogenetica.com. And, we sell our products online at our website. We also send through Amazon. But, if you come to our website, I can offer a code for, the listeners of this podcast, which is called, just put podcast in all uppercase in the code, and you will get a discount additional there for your benefit. And, to thank Pascal for inviting us to this conversation. That's how you can reach us. We also sell through Amazon online.
Thank you. That's absolutely fantastic, Alma, and thank you for that generous offer. We'll have all those links and promotional code in our show notes. And for those interested in exploring how AI solutions can drive efficiency and accelerate growth in their own biopharma ventures, you can find more information about WATSNEX Biopharma and how we help visionary biopharma and medtech executives achieve ambitious objectives and overcome critical pains through AI-driven solutions. Our website is WATSNEXBiopharma.com. So if you find this episode valuable, please subscribe to our different social media channels, leave us a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories and insights to you. Thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Barranco-Mendoza. Nice having this chat with you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.